we can get most of the session on record, because we would like to share this with our colleagues, with our eco ambassadors in different countries. Thank you for being here today. So just an overview of what this summer has been focusing on, summer project. We will be focusing on narrating local stories through the lens of the SDGs. And this is a 5 weeks program, 3rd week already. Amazing how weeks just fly by so quickly. And this week we will be learning about making story maps and why they are important. We have had some glimpse of story maps last week, but we'll be getting into the nitty-gritties of story maps this week. And finally, the students and whoever is participating, teachers, they'll when they create these story maps, we will be having a showcase of these story maps in our conference, International Conference for Sustainable Development, that will be happening in September. During UNGA, during Transformation Education Summit, a lot of things are happening in September. So I think this will be a really nice way of showcasing stories that are coming from students rather than top down. So we'll be this week, we are focusing on learning how to create story maps. We have already shared a learning path link on how to create story maps after our session. So I hope we've reviewed it. It's always nice to review it to see how the maps are created, some tips and other things. So we will be going over what is the Eco Ambassadors program really quickly, summer program goals and timeline, recap of previous weeks. Then we'll get into our story maps with Mariam and Alan, who are really spearheading this story map work. We'll also be speaking with Ashley, who's created a story map last year, and she'll be showcasing a story map, and then again, some questions as we go along. So really quickly, Eco Ambassadors program is a combination of science training and eco advocacy. We combine the science aspect, we combine the social science aspect through the eco advocacy. And for this part, for this summer, we are focusing on storytelling, creative writing. So a lot of it is eco advocacy for this part. But we always encourage students and everyone to focus on the science component in the story itself, to give us more hardcore science based reasoning of why your story is important. So something to keep in mind as we go along. Summer programs, we'll be focusing on GIS related storytelling information. GIS is basically getting geospatial data from on your topic, and that can be varied. This year, we don't have a specific topic in mind. And then we will also be doing training modules. We'll be sharing all the information that we have. We have Esri licenses. We'll be also participating to create these story maps, draft version. We'll give you feedback. And then it's an iterative process on how we create, together we create the story maps. And finally, in September, we will be focusing on sharing these story maps with everyone. Expected student competencies. We hope that you are already knowledgeable about SDGs. Now, this will help you to bring in different aspects like the turn it around cards that we did in our first session. Those sessions, by the way, are all recorded, and we can send you the recordings of those sessions in case if you want to review some of them. You may already have seen it. So integrate the story, integrate the turn it around cards into your story maps, integrate the sustainable development goals, think about the idea of what you want to narrate from your local experiences, and then thinking about data as relevant, and finally creating those story maps. To teach, these story maps can be helpful to teach your peers, to even teach your teachers, teach your parents about the things that are important to you. So how to create a story map? There is a learning path that we have circulated earlier on that was shared with us by Mariam. So feel free to use that as a base to learn the basics of creating a story map. And by the way, it's a process. And I was a student last year. That was my first story map that I created. And I have to tell you that 10-year-old or even Ashley here, who is a middle school student, has created a much better story map than me. So, feel free to use that experience and keep learning and keep going forward as we go ahead learning about story maps. We have Mariam Rabi today from SDGs today, from the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And she really has been pivotal in the Eco Ambassadors program because of her, we got to learn about story maps, and because of her, we got to learn about story map, which integrates SDGs. So I think her work has been very informational for and has empowered our Eco Ambassadors program because of this tool that she worked with Esri and has been able to make this bridge between the students and the teachers to be able to use these story maps in the most fantastic way. I'll ask Mariam to share her ideas and see how she wants to focus more on the story maps and tell us why is this important and what has been your experience so far.
Thanks so much, Radhika. It's a pleasure to be working with you and the students over the past year. It's been a pleasure to be able to share what we know and what we have access to and kind of see what the students can do with it and all the impactful stories that they've been sharing with us over the past year. So maybe I'll start with a little bit of a short background, and we have the honor of having Alan with us today, and then jump right into the story map portion of this. But just to provide a little bit of context on how this all started, we launched the SDGs Today program at SDSN in partnership with Esri and National Geographic 2 years ago. The objective was to advance the production and use of timely data for the SDGs. So we started doing a lot of technical work with different research groups, different organizations who are focusing on various SDGs. And throughout that process, we realized that there are two things that we need to do. One, start focusing on building capacity and educational resources so that we can make these tools accessible to a wider community of students, of researchers, journalists, and policymakers. And also create a platform where students can share their story and their narrative using maps, using these GIS skills that we're teaching them. So the ArcGIS story map tool became a very powerful tool used across various user groups. So students, a lot of researchers that we work with, other NGOs, academics. It's a great way to contextualize the technical work that a lot of people are doing that oftentimes are left within an academic publication without it being accessible to policymakers or other stakeholders that could benefit from that information. It's also a great way to embed different kinds of media. So you can embed a video, you can embed audio, you can embed images. So it's very dynamic. It's the digital version of what we're used to in terms of seeing in PDFs attached in an email. So it's been a powerful tool in contextualizing the data and also adding a human element to it. So it's not just about the methodology that was developed brilliantly to measure or monitor a particular SDG, but it also allows you to create a narrative that shows the kind of impact it's having on communities around the world. So last year, Radhika and I were talking about the Eco Ambassadors program, and so we decided to kind of integrate ArcGIS into this program. We offered some training sessions. We had folks from the story map team join us as well. And all of the recordings from last year's sessions are available, and I'm going to share the link in the chat. As Radhika mentioned, we also developed a learn path, so a series of lessons that you can follow and learn more about story maps, or how to even get started with creating a map. And then some examples of story maps that we found through the Esri repository, but also a collection of story maps that students last year created as well. So I'll share links to all of those resources in the chat. And I'm going to stop here and hand it over to Alan Carroll from the Esri storytelling team. He leads the work at Esri, and it's been such an honor to work with him and have him be part of this journey with us. And so I'm going to hand it over to Alan to introduce himself and tell us a little bit more about how to get started with story maps. Thank you so much, Alan, for being with us. Alan, you're muted.
Sorry about that. How many times have we all done that? Anyway, thank you so much, Mariam. It's such a pleasure to be here and to have a chance to talk about story maps, which is my favorite topic. So my background is I worked at National Geographic for 27 years and was over the last dozen years or so, I was the chief cartographer there, which was a wonderful honor. And I got to know this amazing company called Esri. And about a dozen years ago, made the move from National Geographic to Esri. And of course, Esri is the premier provider of geographic information systems, software, and services. And it's also a wonderful company in that it's really mission oriented. So it puts a lot of resources into supporting education efforts and conservation and other nonprofit organizations. So it's been a wonderful 12 years to work for this kind of amazing company, which also I'm grateful to for having given me the freedom to create story maps. So story maps grew out of some early experiments that I did in my latter years at Esri. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. But when I came to Esri, it was Jack Dangerman, Esri's founder and CEO, he's been running the company for 51 years, maybe 52 now, and has built it into this amazing organization. But at any rate, he sort of charged me with coming up with continuing to work on a way to combine interactive maps with multimedia content to tell stories about the world. So it's been an exciting dozen years. We spent about a year experimenting and then started creating these web apps that people could use without needing any development or coding expertise to combine maps with photos, videos, audio, et cetera, to tell stories about the world. And of course, more on that in a minute. So it's grown into quite a program. And again, I might as well just dive in here. I thought I'd leave this up for a second if people want to grab links off of the QR codes. But let me just go ahead and dive in, because pretty much all of these are accessible via the Story Maps homepage. So you can find Story Maps at storymaps.arcgis.com. And as you can see, there's a navigation bar that provides that links to a gallery. I'll show that in a bit. There are lots and lots of resources. So you've already heard about a Learn lesson, but there's also an instructional story map called Getting Started with ArcGIS Story Maps. There are a bunch of blogs about specific topics, and you can find instructional videos on YouTube and lots more. So storymaps.arcgis.com is the place to go. Just a quick kind of background on story maps, just some basics. So what are story maps? They work on the web, and they combine interactive maps. And the story maps themselves and the maps within them are hosted on Esri's cloud service called arcgis.com. So they work on. I'm sorry. I skipped something here. So you can combine interactive maps with multimedia content. So your photos, your videos, your audio, and text, of course, to tell stories about the world. And so there are hundreds of thousands of stories out there that cover almost every subject under the sun, and it scales from worldwide, globe spanning to down to the neighborhood level. Also created by big organizations as well as individuals. They work on a variety of screen sizes. So in other words, they're responsive. It's best to author story maps on big screens, but my fellows, my colleagues on the story maps dev and design teams work really hard to make sure that you get an equally rewarding experience on tablets and cell phones as well as PCs and Macs. To me, kind of the secret sauce of story maps is the builder function. So the heart of the builder function, and I'll briefly show you in a few minutes, is the is what we call the block palette. And so you can imagine each one of these elements as a sort of building block, and you can stack those together and move them around to create a multimedia story. Again, more on that to come shortly. And as I mentioned, they're hosted by Esri in the cloud in arcgis.com, but that just provides a place to put them. We don't claim any kind of ownership over them. But ArcGIS Online represents a huge resource of geospatial content. And you can also use it to find maps that you can incorporate into your stories. About 4 or 5 years ago, when we'd created a series of sort of separate apps, each of which had a different way of combining maps and multimedia, we decided it was time to do a sort of second generation story maps. So what we did was kind of set the what we now call the classic story maps aside and created a new version. So there used to be separate builders for what we called Story Map Tour and Story Map Journal, et cetera. You might encounter some of these as you do web searches and things. But we've integrated them all into a single builder, so you don't have to learn multiple ways of creating things. And it also means you can mix and match the sorts of user experiences within a single story. So what used to be separate apps, some of them now are what we call these immersive sections, like you're seeing now, where the screen stays static as you scroll, but caption boxes go by. And there's also a sort of the standard sort of scroll experience. It's been a really exciting 10 or 12 years. So after that initial year of experimentation, we started releasing these story map apps with their builder functions. And we're now actually over 2.2 million story maps hosted on Esri's cloud service, and many, many more that we can't count that are sort of behind firewalls and within organizations. They're also being used by lots of organizations, lots of US agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency and the US Geological Service rather. Lots of big NGOs like the UN Refugee Agency, the Nature Conservancy, et cetera, and Smithsonian Institution here in Washington, and also my alma mater, National Geographic, is using story maps in various ways. One thing that maybe one thing that excites me most about story maps is how they have taken off in the educational realm. So young people and students like you have embraced story maps. Perhaps your teachers or professors, might assign a story map instead of in place of a traditional research paper. But about a third of the activity on our website is coming from educational institutions, from primary school all the way up through college and graduate schools. I should also mention quickly that there are now 2 story maps. So there's ArcGIS story maps, which is what we're using for this program. But just to avoid confusion, there's a second thing that's just called story maps, or storymaps.com. And that's a consumer version that you can use as an individual to tell your own stories, things like travel logs and family histories and things like that. The big difference between the two is that the personal story maps doesn't connect with this whole GIS ecosystem that Esri maintains. And so for your purposes, you're going to want to stick with ArcGIS story maps for the time being, but it's something you might want to check out and experiment with. So with that, I'm going to move on. We've maintained one of the resources that you can find from our homepage is a curated gallery that represents a tiny subset of the story maps that are out there. But we've picked them because we think they're particularly good examples of good storytelling. And I urge you to just kind of peruse these because I think they'll give you lots of ideas about how to put your stories together. Ways of, interesting ways of using the immersive sections and combining maps and other kinds of content. I'm going to just show you a couple of example stories and point out some of the features of story maps, and then I'll give you a brief look at the builder. I won't spend a lot of time on the builder because I have some faith. I've been told by a bunch of educators that if they just expose their students to ArcGIS story maps, they pretty much figure it out on their own. So in other words, our fellow designers and coders have worked really, really hard to make the builder function as intuitive as possible. And we think if you just take a little time and explore and don't worry about breaking things, you can always undo, you can always create a duplicate story map, things like that, that you'll quickly pick up what, how the builder function works and how you can use it to create these beautiful narratives. So just a couple of quick examples again. This is one from the Amazon conservation team, a relatively small nonprofit that does wonderful work in the Amazon basin. They work with indigenous groups to help those groups save their own, kind of preserve their own cultural identity, but at the same time preserve the natural habitats and systems within which they live and make their living. So one of the features of StoryMap is they're different formats for the what we call the cover. So this one uses a full kind of a full screen image. You can move the title up or down depending on where the sort of quieter space in your image is. The cover image can also be like an animated GIF or a short looping video. Story Maps has a gallery function as well. So you can of course embed individual images or videos and adjust their size, but you can also kind of group them in galleries and allow people to kind of click around and explore them and enlarge them, look at them. This is the immersive section we call Sidecar. And so there are two versions of Sidecar. One has this sort of anchored side panel, and there's a version of it where that side panel is floating, and there's also a slideshow version. But one of the cool things about Sidecar is that you can use it to create what we call map choreography. So if you include a web map in one of the panels of Sidecar and then copy that panel and then pan and zoom to move the web map, that means that when readers experience your story, that map moves. So you can use the Sidecar to a really interesting effect to really kind of make your maps dance and sing in cool ways. You can also use it to expose different layers of a map so that as people move around or as people scroll through a narrative, they might be seeing, say, a population density layer or a vegetation layer or something like that. So this is a nice example of map choreography. And as you can see in the side panel, they've combined text and images. This, of course, what we call the main stage can also accommodate images and videos and 2D maps and 3D maps. So it's a nice example of really effective storytelling by the Amazon conservation team. A very different one, also on a sort of natural history sort of theme though, is called Sounds of the Wild West. And we worked with a kind of a one-person operation called the Acoustic Atlas. And it's somebody out in Montana who maintains an archive of natural sounds. And so we partnered with him to kind of bring the West alive. This was when we were still experimenting with audio. So this was a way for us to kind of prove the concept. And it proved to be pretty effective. So we incorporated audio as a standard part of storytelling tools. Now, I'm not sure whether you're going to be able to hear the audio or not, but once you do an initial click to opt in, are you hearing birds? Maybe not. It's too bad. Okay, well, I urge you to just Google. I'm going to turn it off because I'm distracted by it. At any rate, if you Google "Sounds of the Wild West" story map, you'll be able to find it. So as I'm scrolling, I'm hearing wolves howling and birds singing and waterfalls, water dropping over waterfalls, and water boiling in Yellowstone's hot springs and things. So that's one thing you can do with audio. Another thing you can do with audio is the more conventional thing where you can embed a little player. And so that way users can opt to hear these individual sound clips. I wish you could hear the roaring grizzly bears, but since you can't, I won't play it. It's kind of startling. At any rate, I think both of these stories give you a sense of the sorts of ways you can mix and match, big images, small images, immersive sections, standard scrolling sections, things like that. So by the way, the process of building story maps can be maybe sometimes a little bit tedious, maybe repetitive, maybe iterative because you're building a story and it's a creative process, but it's also really engaging. As you gain confidence with the builder, I think you'll find yourself enjoying the process of creating and refining your stories. As you create stories and then your own homepage on storymaps.arcgis.com starts to be populated with your stories. So you can easily scroll through and find the stories that you've worked on in the past. If you want to create a new story, you just click this button up here. It says New Story. It gives you options for kind of pre-formatted stories, but we'll start from scratch. And again, I'm just going to give you a very, very quick sense of what you can do. I'm going to move this so I can access a couple of images. So as you can see, you start with a sort of blank title page. So I can just start to type. You can type your text into the story from scratch. You can also draft your story in say Microsoft Word and simply cut and paste. There's an optional subtitle, and you can of course add your own byline. And perhaps your affiliation, which is a nice idea. And then you can simply start typing to tell your story. And I'm not going to spend time typing, but you get the idea. So that's sort of the default thing to start. You can also, once you've got text there, you can also highlight the text and make it bold. You can add hyperlinks. You can make it color. You can also, there are paragraph settings so that you can make your text larger, or you can use your text as a subheading or a heading. So easy and quick type controls. You can also use these little plus signs to add all sorts of things. So it's the plus sign that opens up this palette that allows you to choose among all these different blocks. So I'm going to just quickly add an image. I click on image. I can browse my files, or I can just drag and drop images into it. So I'm just going to pick an image from my hard drive, drag it onto there, and add it to my story. And once it's there, I see this little control panel. I can make it kind of inset into longer text block. I can and make it kind of float on the left or the right, and then I can make it kind of small, medium, large. So if I want to, it can go the whole width of the screen. I can do the same thing, of course. I can add a button. So this might say, go to my paper or my website, and then you can simply easily use that to you can easily add a web link to a button. So just start exploring the different blocks. and I think you'll enjoy, you know, just finding them and adjusting them. So there are several different. So they're the basic sort of things like text and buttons and separators, like little rules, that little lines that can separate the sections of your story. And then you can get into more elaborate things like audio and embed. So there's the embed feature, allows you to embed pretty much almost anything that has a web address or a URL. Some websites don't allow embeds, but you can use this to embed, you know, YouTube videos, although there's a separate video thing. But you can essentially put, say, a website within a story. You want to kind of limit how you use that, because you don't want to sort of clutter up your story with a lot of different things. There's also a timeline function that can be useful for chronologies, but it can also be used just simply to kind of summarize a process. And then there are the immersives. So here's the Sidecar immersive. Once I go there, I can choose between the docked and floating functions and a slideshow function. So once you choose one of these, it gives you a new set of controls. So you can add text in the same sort of way in the side panel, and you can add images, maps, embeds, swipes, and or even add a sort of solid color to the main stage. So if you're wanting to use, say, the slideshow format as a presentation tool, you can make the background just a sort of neutral color. But the real fun part of these immersive sections is when you use images, videos, or maps in the background. So that was a very, very quick tour. I'm gonna, I guess I'll add a couple more things that you should know about. So one thing to look at and check out is the design panel. So if you choose it, you can choose different cover formats. So there can be a side-by-side version. I'm going to go ahead and add a cover image here so that you get a sense of it. Kind of an unusual photo choice, but I'll use it anyway. So here's the side-by-side version. Let's let that photo load. There it goes. And then I can also choose the minimal version. And so this version puts a sort of strip style photo near the top. Now, as you can see, if I wanted to feature that car, I'd have some, you know, I'm in trouble here. So all I need to do is go here, and I can set the center of my image so that the car is more pleasingly centered. Another thing to keep in mind is that there's, at any point, you can access a preview function. So I can go here and check on how my story is going to look at various sizes and formats. So I can preview how my story is going to look on a cell phone, and that car shows up pretty nicely, and so do the skyscrapers. Same with landscape on a cell phone, tablets, and full screens. So that's a quick and I think important way to check how your story is looking. So there are other features in the design panel. I'll just give me one more quick look. Another thing you can do that's really cool within the design panel is, with a single click, you can change the look and feel of your story. So there are several choices depending on your topic. You know, if you're writing about deserts, maybe this theme would look better. If you're writing about, say, you know, going exploring a cave, maybe the dark background version is better. There's also, you can also browse themes. So I won't show you this at this point, but from your Story Maps homepage, you can access a theme builder. And so you can choose from hundreds of different fonts. You can pick background colors and highlight colors. You can customize your things like quote blocks and buttons. So you can create your own theme that helps you kind of create a little world that kind of unifies the look and feel of your story. So with that, I think I'm going to pause for a bit and see if there are any questions, and then I'm going to give you a few sort of general pointers about making story maps and thinking about stories. Questions? Have any of you actually experimented with story maps yet, or are you all brand new to them?
Feel free to unmute and share your experience. And while we're doing that, Alan, there's a question in the chat.
Okay.
Can we unpublish a story map if we choose to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So by the way, as you're building your story map, it automatically saves, so you don't have to worry about suddenly, if you close your browser accidentally, it going away. But when you go to publish, you have 3 choices. So you can publish it privately, which means only you can see it. You can also publish to my organization. So I'm assuming that that you're being given access to an account, to an organizational account, so you can publish it so you and your peers can view it. But then you can also publish it for everyone. So at any point, if you have a published story map, you can go back into the builder, which you can, you can access the edit function via these 3 little dots, and you can then change the sharing settings. So yeah, lots of flexibility there. And it also means, of course, that you can wait and publish, make your story public when you're ready to, but not before. You can also, by the way, make your story public and then go into the builder, make a bunch of changes, and then decide whether to save those changes. So in other words, if you make changes, you can decide whether to swap out the published version for your changed story, or discard those changes and stick with what you originally had. Another nice little trick is this, and I love this. So you can duplicate your story. So that means if you've got, if you're well along in your original story and you think, I'd like to try a really different approach, but I don't want to start from scratch, you can duplicate the story, and it'll add a little copy in parentheses, the word copy, to the title, so you can tell that it's the duplicate. And then you can experiment and try a different version. And if you like it better than the original one, you can kind of dump the first one and publish the duplicate. Other questions? If not, I think I will move on. So an important thing to remember with story maps is it's just like say Microsoft Word. So it's just a tool, and you can use the Microsoft Word to publish the Great American Novel, or you can use it to publish a yard sale sign. So it's the key to story maps really is in the storytelling itself. And so over the years, I've gained a little expertise on storytelling, and so I thought I'd share just a few pointers, things to keep in mind as you create your stories. None of these tips I'm going to give you necessarily applies to every story that's created. Some of them are particular to certain types of stories. So don't feel you have to follow all 9 rules. And of course, there are probably 900 more I could come up with, but these are a few of the what I think might be more valuable. So one thing to do is to think about how you want to start with a bang. And of course, you might do this late in the process once you're refining your story, but it can often be a mistake to use just a label for a story title. So I like to work to come up with something that's sort of catchy. It might use alliteration, starting with a certain, words, several words of the same letter, or it might include a verb. In other words, something that helps draw people into the story rather than just say story map about X. And another thing to keep in mind is to try to kind of marry the title with the image you choose for your cover. So this one about this amazing National Geographic explorer named Paul Salopek, who's walking across the world. There's a stunning image that he combined with perhaps the title's nothing terribly special, but it's got a rhythm to it and a kind of poetry to it that I think is sort of catchy. Here's a nice example of a title and a very evocative photograph that I think work really well together. So evoking refugees and providing maybe some empathy with them, but without featuring individuals and perhaps invading people's privacy. Second is to think about adding a hero. And again, not every story needs this, but most effective stories involve a sort of main character of some sort, or maybe additional characters. People love to see and read about people. So even if your story isn't primarily about people, it's nice to think about, now, how can I kind of humanize this story with an example or portraits of people? A nonprofit called the Grand Canyon Trust did this amazing story called Voices of Grand Canyon. And you hear, using the audio feature, as you go through the story, you hear from these tribal people about how they're spiritually tied to the Grand Canyon. Very effective and moving. Your hero doesn't necessarily have to be a human being. So I've seen several stories that feature an animal or a bird. So this was one of a couple of stories this organization created that follows the path of a migratory bird. And you learn about the bird along the way, but you also learn where its stopover points are and what organizations are working to preserve those habitats that are necessary for the bird to kind of refuel as it migrates. Another possibility appropriate to some stories is to provide a sense of rhythm. So I did this story several years ago on sacred places and sacred pilgrimages. And as you can see, I worked to make the title kind of catchy. But I also established a rhythm. So there are, I think, 5 pilgrimages for 5 major religions. And I don't have time to show them all to you, but I tried to start with a sort of section title, a 1 or 2 sentence introduction, then a map showing the route, and then more detailed text with some photos with it. And so that just repeated through the story. And as readers go through it, I think they get kind of comfortable with that rhythm, and it makes sense to them. This is another story that uses that kind of succession of content. One thing, I come from kind of a design background, so the one thing I really enjoy thinking about is using the design panel in the builder and the ability to customize themes to create a really distinctive look and feel that you can then work to reflect in the maps and even in the images or artwork. So this is a great example of that. So as you can see, everything's in black and white with just some red highlights. And so they've actually strengthened the story by taking stuff off, like the rest of the color spectrum. And the result is just a really, a really uniform, really unified look and feel. So, once you're into it, everything just kind of ties together, and it has a kind of emotional resonance as well. It can be easy to just kind of throw in graphics and maybe a bar graph might have a completely different color treatment, but it's worth the trouble to take some time to kind of visually unify things and try to kind of evoke visually what the sort of editorial approach of your story is. Here's a different story that uses a much brighter color palette, but they've chosen a dark background and dark backgrounds for the maps as well. And bright colors to the elements of the maps, and the result is a really powerful looking story as well as a powerful story in terms of its content. I've mentioned the theme, the ability to choose themes, and so this is a quick way to start to achieve that unified look and feel, but it's worth extra kind of manual effort to try to achieve that. Another is to think about is that, and I've already kind of touched on this with the preview function. So one size doesn't fit all, and that means that, of course, your story is going to be viewed on all sorts of devices. So most of my career I designed for print, and the one thing as a designer I could count on was the size of the piece of paper I was designing to. But of course, when you're dealing with the web, that people are going to be looking at your stories on really small screens, as well as big screens, and maybe even projecting them so that your story might end up 5 feet across. So that using that preview feature and pretty regularly checking how your story looks across these different screen sizes is a good way to go. So here's another totally different thing about size and scale. So this is more a sort of editorial thing. So a lot of stories, I think, are made more effective by interspersing anecdotes with overviews. So you might start a story by saying, here's somebody walking across India, but then after you introduce that person or depict that person walking a trail or a road, then you back off to show the whole, maybe to show thematic maps of India, and you might return to that person or another character later in the story. So that kind of going back and forth between large scale and small scale can be really effective. So this isn't a gallery, these are individual screen grabs from a single story about, this is back to Paul Salopek, but his part of his trek where he walked across India, and he discusses the pretty grave water problems that they're facing. So again, humanizing the story with his walk and the people he encounters, but through them and by using smaller scale maps, pointing out the issues and noting that these issues aren't just local, they're regional or even global. Another thing to keep in mind is that we love interactive maps, and that was the original intent for story maps, but you can use static maps to good effect as well. So don't be afraid if, say you've created a map on ArcGIS Online, or even found a map that's publicly available that you want to use, to simply make a screen grab and put it in your story. Again, a lot of times you want people to interact with your maps, but there are other occasions when you might want people to just learn one specific thing from a map and not be distracted by panning and zooming or turning layers on and off and things like that. So again, we love interactive maps, but both static and interactive maps can be useful, very useful. One of the things I didn't have a chance to show you is that there are actually 2 mapping options in ArcGIS Story Maps. So you can use the power of ArcGIS Online and web mapping to create multi-layered web maps that you can use in your story, or find them to use in your story. But there's also a very simple map builder called Express Maps that you can use you can choose a number of base maps, and then you can add, as you've seen here, a series of points. You can add labels. You can also add lines, routes, and arrows and areas. So if you want to do a kind of a simple locator map, or show, say, a route or an area that you're featuring, Express Maps can be a really good way to go. Just 2 more. One is, and you may or may not follow this, super closely, given the, depending on the nature of your project and the kind of audience you're reaching. But the web can be a kind of attention deficit disorder sort of medium. So if your story goes on and on and on, it's going to be really easy for your readers to be tempted to just click away or open another browser tab. So we work really hard to make our stories short. We can be kind of merciless. Often I will fall in love with some element of a story and then be told by a colleague later on that, you don't really need that. It's just a distraction, which brings up another notion, which is collaborating on a story, or at the very least having people review your story and provide comments, can be really useful. We all get really close to our creative efforts, and getting a fresh viewpoint can be really important and useful. My team and I collaborate on stories all the time, and every single story I've worked on has gotten a lot richer thanks to collaborating with people with different viewpoints and different ideas. My colleague Ross Donahue, back when the Eastern U.S. had this once every 17 years amazing appearance of cicadas, did a really nice, very short but really informative story about the cicadas. Finally, and maybe most important, which is why I have it last, is to have some sort of call to action. So your stories are likely to be about an issue of some sort, and we all want our stories to get people excited and interested in a topic, but it's best not to leave them hanging and to have some sort of action to take at the end of a story, whether it's as simple as here's where to go for further reading via a button or a little embed card, or a donate button, or a whole series of actions, which some organizations have done. But you want to, of course, you want to cite your sources, and those sources might include links to the organizations or the authors of that article or source material. So some sort of call to action is a great way to go, and that kind of does it for my advice. So I'm going to stop the share and ask again if there are any questions or comments. And I hope this has been helpful. It's kind of a whirlwind tour, as I know it's a lot to take in at once, but I do think you'll find the builder function intuitive and fun to use.
Thank you so much for that wonderful overview, Alan. There's a comment/question that I think was added before you walked us through the 9 steps. So I think you've addressed this to some extent, but I'm going to share it with you. So it's from Betsy. This is fabulous. Can you touch on incorporating data layers and best practices? We're interested in storytelling with data.
Yeah, that's great. So of course, data, our favorite way of visualizing data is on a map. So we certainly, and Story Maps really supports that. So Story Maps, together with the really rich functionality of ArcGIS Online. So what we do typically, and every story is different, but what I'll do typically is create a web map that has several layers that I know I'm going to use in the story, but plan to use them individually. So, and then I'll try to, add that data as a layer of a web map. Choose a base map that kind of complements and features that data layer well. And of course, you can use either ArcGIS Pro or ArcGIS Online to refine the look and feel of your visualization itself. So there are functions called smart mapping that give you some pretty intelligently derived color palettes and symbol sets and things. And then what I often do is I'll save that web map with the layers actually turned off, and then I'll go to the story. I will load that web map, and then you can refine the map within the story builder. You can't change the map itself, but you can change where it's, the zoom level and the map extent, and you can also change which layers turned on or not. So the reason I turn the layers off in the web map is that way I can, when I go into using the map in the story, I just click once to turn the layer I want to have on. So I mentioned map choreography. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is that story maps are great because you can parse maps out into their separate layers and themes. So single maps or multiple maps, but I love to do it as a single map so that you can use that sort of map choreography. So instead of trying to crowd lots of themes onto a single map image, you can show them sequentially. And another thing I didn't show, by the way, is there's also a swipe function. So you can use map choreography within the immersive sections to go from one layer to another, expose one layer after another. But you can also use swipe so people can directly compare back and forth. And so on each side of the swipe, it's easy to turn a data layer on or off as an author, and then you present it to the reader the way you want them to kind of consume that data. Hope that helps. I mean, that's a long seminar in itself, of course, how to do that, but how to best sort of visualize data.
Thank you, Alan. And I'd encourage everyone to take a look at the story maps from last year's program to see how different student groups incorporated data layers and visualized their data in their story maps. They all did a pretty great job.
They sure did.
There's one more question, Alan, which I think is interesting. How do we make sure that the issue or story map will be on gets recognition?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
How do we make sure that the issue or story map will be on gets recognition?
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what exactly is meant by issue, but story maps, there are lots and lots of ways to make story maps visible to users and readers. So of course you're working within an effort which will feature those story maps already, but you can also socialize your story via Twitter, etc. You can also link to story maps via embed cards, within websites. You can embed story maps directly within websites. So we provide the tool and the sort of storage medium for stories, but it's mostly up to individuals and organizations to then figure out how they can bring an audience to that story. We often help, including with Mariam's, you and your colleagues, to help socialize your stories because they're so cool and important. But yeah, it's mostly up to authors and organizations to come up with a strategy for attracting an audience to your stories.
Thank you, Alan.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Mariam?
No, I think I agree that the tool itself is set up in a way that it does try to communicate that whatever the subject matter is in the best way that one can, and that's the tool that we use to even promote a report. Oftentimes, a lot of our teams use it as a dynamic executive summary that they can share when they launch a report or a new initiative. So I agree that a lot of it is then up to us and how we share that with our networks.
One other trick or thing to keep in mind is that we've worked pretty hard to make to sort of search engine optimize stories. Sorry, my dog's barking. But so in other words, if you try within your title or subtitle or the beginning of your story to incorporate words that you think people are likely to search on to find your story, and that can often work. And in fact, I find a lot of stories simply by Googling them and adding the term story map, and it usually takes me straight to the story. It's easier for me to Google a story even than to find it on ArcGIS online usually. It's thanks to search engine optimization.
Thank you, Alan. And Ray, I hope that answered your question, and feel free to unmute yourself if you have any follow-up questions. Radhika, I'm not sure how much time we have left, so maybe I'll hand it over to you. And once again, Alan, thank you so much for the very informative overview of story maps.
All right, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mariam and Alan. This was fantastic. We have Ashley June here, and just to give a sense of what students were able to do last year, I think Ashley would be a great person to showcase some of her efforts. We don't have much time, but I think it will be, we will not be able to do a complete justice to this session if we don't hear from Ashley's work. So over to Ashley for her experience on story maps last year. Ashley?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Hi everyone, my name is Ashley June and I am an upcoming...
Ashley, can you speak a little louder please, or is it just a little bit loud?
Sorry, let me just change the audio. Is that better? Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Ashley June and I'm an upcoming freshman at the Loomis Chaffee School in Connecticut. And today I will be just walking through a few of my story maps that I created over the past year and just showing you guys what a typical story map looks like and why I chose the topic that I chose, and giving some tips along the way that will hopefully be helpful in creating the story map. So let me just share my screen. Yeah. So let's get right into it. So the first story map that I will show, as you can see from the title, is about how fast fashion is impacting our ocean pollution and how it is harming our oceans. So fast fashion speeding to our ocean pollution, invisible crisis. So before I even get started, I think it is really important, and maybe I should probably just tell you guys why I chose this topic. And I chose this topic about fast fashion because the theme for last year was SDG 14, which is like life below water. So it was about waterways and oceans. And I tried to think about topics that have really interested me. And one of the topics that interested me was like fashion. And since I like shopping and since I wanted to get to learn more about fashion industry, I thought like kind of exploring about fast fashion and its impact on our ocean would be a great idea. So that's how I kind of decided this topic. And I think that's actually one of the tips that I would like to give everyone, is that when we all choose a topic, I think it is important for all of us to probably like zoom out of the broad idea of environment and try to find topics that interest that interest you. That it can be anything. It can be like TV shows or like food or just like current events like wars, because what I noticed along the way of doing a lot of environmental work is that whatever topic you choose, it actually relates a lot to the environment, and you will be able to make a lot of connection between the environment and just a random topic that you find, because there are just so many causes of how because there are so many ways that our environment is being harmed. So that is one tip that I would like to give, to kind of talk about and research a topic that you're passionate about, because that's going to like make the research process so much more enjoyable, and that's also going to appeal to the audience, and the audience will be more engaged in the presentation as well. So getting right into the story map itself, at first I just gave an overview of what my story map will be about. I kind of make it as a hook, so I kind of also included some interesting information about fast fashion and microplastic pollution, which is sort of the main idea of the story map. And my first section was about how horrible is the situation that humans are facing right now. And here I just defined what fast fashion is, and I also talked about the effects of fast fashion. And as you can see here in the effects section, I gave a lot of data and just numerical evidences. And that's also one other tip that I would like to give, is that when creating these story maps and trying to share an idea, I think it's really important for all of us to kind of read a lot of articles and find the numerical evidence and data and include them, because it really makes the author, which is like me, really credible to the audience, and it also just simply makes the story map much more full and makes it more feel like it's packed with more information. And then I talked about microfibers, and then I also talked about toxic textile dyes. And here I used a tool that Mr. Carroll actually explained before, which is like side to side image tool. And this is one of the tools that Arcgis Story Map provide, which is that you can kind of place two different pictures side to side, left to right, and this is what I did. And I thought that this tool is especially useful if you want to sort of establish a cause and effect relationship, or kind of also establish a before and after relationship. And then after that, I have the second section, which is how our ocean's changing. And in this second section, I talked about, well, I went deeper into microfibers, but the primary focus was about two different experiments or study that I've read. So the first one was about number of scientists going to the Northern Sea and collecting and finding out how much microfibers is contaminated and the amount of microfibers in those Northern Sea. And they went into two different locations, which was Beaufort Sea and Canadian Arctic Archipelago. So in order to when I was reading this study, I thought it would be a great idea to use this interactive map, and it allowed the audience to kind of visualize where the Beaufort Sea and Canadian Arctic archipelago is located. So I did use the interactive map, and to the left side, I gave a picture and labeled the location, and to the right here is where the map is, so I can zoom it in here, and that is the Beaufort Sea. And also, I also have a space where I can give more information about this location or this map, or I can even contextualize the map even more. But I use this space instead to kind of give the results of the experiment. And as I scroll down, it automatically moves into the Canadian Arctic archipelago, which was really efficient for me as well. And I really, really recommend using this tool, the interactive map tool, when you create your story maps, because I have heard a lot of people around me telling me that this use of interactive map actually helped them to understand this experiment much more better, much more easier. And then after that, I used the quote tool, which is also one of the tools or features that ArcGIS Story Map provides. And I think that you can use this tool whenever you want to kind of hammer down an idea and actually provide some emphasis onto an idea In the second experiment, I was about how these microfibers are impacting the health of these marine animals, especially the fishes, and it is affecting them in a way there where it is disrupting their endocrine systems. And I didn't include a interactive map for this because the location was just a water tank, but for this one I gave a lot of just specific details about this information, and I just showed in picture to the right. And then I wrapped up this section with explaining about the excessive usage of water and how in order to create just a single piece of garment, the amount of water that is used is great, is excessive, and I was just trying to portray that through this section. And then the last section was about how can we reduce fast fashion, and this is actually what Mr. Carroll talked about before, is that when we create story maps, it is important to kind of provide a solution to it. And I definitely agree with that, and I was actually trying to talk about that because even though we cannot actually provide a definite solution to it because it's impossible, but I think it is really important for us to kind of at least provide solutions that can help us to get closer to reducing whatever issue that we are talking about. So I talked about how can we reduce fast fashion, and this was again an overview. And then I created subsections where I talked about what can governments do, what can companies do, what can civil society do, and lastly, what can we do as people to decrease microfiber pollution. And that is the end of the first story map that I would like to share. And the second story map that I would like to share is much more shorter, and I just only want to focus on one specific section, which is the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So just like before, I want to explain why I chose this topic, and again, it's because I wanted to learn more about this war, especially because it was and it still is a very important, I feel like, current event that is going around. And I thought that possibly kind of looking at and trying to connect the dots between this war and the environmental effect would probably be a great idea. So that's why I decided to research on this topic. And frankly, when I decided to explore more about and discover more information about this Russian invasion in Ukraine and the Russia-Ukrainian war, I actually struggled a lot because I didn't know where I'm supposed to start. But at the end, I figured out that because ArcGIS Story Map is a data-driven storytelling, I should try to be as specific I can and provide a lot of data for the audience. And I thought the best way to do that is to kind of split it into different regions and talk about how in this specific region, Russia invaded Ukraine in this way and how that particular attack has caused some kind of a specific environmental harm. And that's what I did. And so I researched about Ternopil and also Mariupol, but I want to kind of touch briefly on Mariupol, because for Mariupol, this information that I learned, I actually used it to create this story map. The interactive map. So what I found about Mariupol was that Russian troops occupied the Azovstal steel mill in Mariupol, and this attack led to a deadly chemical being leaked. And these deadly chemical and substance that was leaked, when it is exposed to water, it is found to be that all the marine animals in the Sea of Azov will be killed, and this chemical can flow all the way through the Mediterranean Sea. So what I did was, if I zoom it in here, and if I click on this tag, I can see that this location is the Azovstal steel mill, and from that I have an arrow pointing towards the Sea of Azov, which is where all the marine animals will be killed. And then I made a longer arrow to the Mediterranean Sea to kind of emphasize how far the chemical can be flowed. And then after that, I talked about different countries that are being affected, and I talked about Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey, and of course Ukraine. And here I discussed about how dolphins are specifically being impacted because of the war. And at the end, I kind of included this picture about the number of environmental crimes committed by Russia in 1 month, to just emphasize on how much environmental harm this war is doing to our environment. And not only just like including that picture, but I also kind of referred back to an event from the past, which is the Chernobyl disaster. And why the reason that I did this was to suggest that the various environmental problems that the Russia-Ukrainian war is bringing and posing to us right now can last so much longer than we actually expect, and it can continue to threaten the marine diversity. So here I just clearly made a different connection with a different event, but I was able to sort of emphasize the environmental crimes that are being committed through this war. So that is the end of the story maps that I want to share. But ultimately, I think the key takeaways from what I just said is to choose a topic that you actually feel passionate about, and providing a lot of data and numerical evidence into your story map, and also especially trying to utilize as much these interactive tools and features that ArcGIS Story Map provides, because that will allow us for like much more efficient communication of this data, and it will make the storytelling much more effective. So I hope that was helpful, and thank you for listening.
That was extremely helpful, just to go over the background and the thinking of how you prepared the story map, Ashley. So it was really helpful to know this. I'm not sure if Betsy ma'am is asking a few things. Free to join GT Zoom after any checks in. Okay. So if there are any questions here for Ashley, maybe one or two questions. Maybe one question from my end, Ashley, which is, when you started using the story map, was it intuitive, or were you able to follow and experiment with on your own, or did you require to see a lot of the learning path and all the other things that we had provided you earlier on?
Well, I watched all of the sessions that you guys like provided last year, so I think that was definitely helpful. So I just like kind of was able to like get a sense of the basic tools that ArcGIS Story Map provide. But as I started to use the story maps, I started to experiment it by myself. So I was able to like learn more features of it on my own. But also just generally, I think the best part about just ArcGIS Story Map is that it is so easy to use, and because the story map actually looks like it is just posing such a like sophisticated like detail and information, it may look like it's like hard to like work with and deal with. But what I realized was that it was really easy once you get the hang of it. So I think that is one of the benefits of the story map as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I completely agree with you. It looks super complicated, but when you actually start playing around and seeing how you want to use different slides, different formatting functions, I think it makes it easier. And the more you experiment, the better you get at it. So thank you, Ashley. Thank you for sharing all of your tips and sharing your time with us. And I hope you will be involved in mentoring some of our other colleagues, your other peers who will be doing these story maps going forward. So we will definitely approach you again. Now, going over the nitty gritties, we will share all of this in the email as well. But just as a follow up, you can also look at some of the inspirational story maps on SDGs today. I think Mariam already sent you the link, but here are some amazing story maps that were developed by students who just learned to do story maps like all of us last year. So feel free to, when you see a lot, then you understand how it will all function. So I think it will be helpful for you to see these story maps. Now, how will we go about doing this? How do you create your own story map? You submit a research topic as soon as possible using this particular form that we have created. We will send you a link of all those who have registered here and also in the Eventbrite who have not been able to make it for the meeting. We will share the research topics, this form. Submit the form with your research topic. When you submit your research form, we will then issue you a license. This can either be done by your teacher. The teachers can submit a form where if you are working collaboratively, couple of you are working collaboratively, or if you are individually working, or if you are working with another friend, you will be getting one license for the story map idea that you have submitted. The next session will be an office hour. So you will have to, ask questions. There will be less content, but the questions need to come from you. By then, we are expecting that you will already submit a research topic and you will get a license to play around, to understand how things are. And if you have any questions on the story map, then that's the time to ask. So we don't have enough time for this. So submit your research topic on this particular form. We will send you that form. We will also send you a license, which is an account on and then you will be able to create a story map. Next week, Friday, we will have a office hour. So use the Eventbrite to register for that session as well. You will get a separate Zoom link. This Zoom link will not work because I think some of you are using our previous Zoom link to enter. For every week, we'll have a new Zoom link. So use the Zoom link that will be given to you for next Friday. And then continue building your skills by visiting the resources modules on the Learn path that we have already shared with you earlier on. And that's it. I think send, and we'll just await your research topic for now. Again, one of my colleagues here has sent this really interesting. We had this discussion on how do you get an idea. Sometimes you don't know where to start. Sometimes you have so many ideas. Sometimes you have one idea that you need to work on. Like Ashley here was focusing on the Russian-Ukraine war. So in this case, we thought that, to get an idea or to get an inspiration, sometimes you need that bigger picture also. So you can start with the bigger picture and see what is happening locally in your neighborhood, in your town, in your state, in your country. So the bigger picture here is the greenhouse gas emissions by sector, and you see which one is the most creating greenhouse gas emissions. It's electricity generation here, 25%, agriculture 24%, manufacturing then 21%. If we are thinking about an environmental issue, greenhouse gas emissions are the major culprit here, right? So we see by which sector it is doing, and then maybe it will give you some idea on that. I see. So if there is 24% agriculture, maybe I need to really focus on agriculture topic. Or if you are so concerned about local transportation in your own town, then that's also 14%, right? If you're interested in manufacturing, so much of plastic is being produced, then you can think of, 21, you are tackling actually 21% of the greenhouse emission by choosing that topic. So I think this is a really nice image to see how bigger picture data can help you to narrow down your focus. So maybe use this as your guiding principle. You don't have to, but it's a nice way of getting bigger picture to local and also use the SDG language. So that's it from us. But are there any specific questions or anything? Mariam is here still. Any questions for her? We will get a lot of chance to think about the questions, think about our research topics as we go along. Just remember. Hi.
I think we have some research topics already. Does anybody want to share theirs? So that you can like just get it out in the open, and then you have to enter it on that form so that you can get the reply and the license back.
I have an idea.
Yes.
Can you hear me? I was thinking about doing a Mexican grey wolf recovery and looking at the stories of a few individual wolves because they have such unique stories to tell. So that's kind of how I was thinking I could incorporate the mapping. I can look at challenges with habitat fragmentation and corridors. And I know that, and lots of other things like Colorado are thinking of introducing their wolves. So what's so special about these Mexican grey wolves? So I was going to mash that together in a story from the perspective of the wolf is what I was thinking. That sounds like a good idea.
No, that sounds fantastic and so relevant. It is bigger picture, so I think it will be able to. And I think for your case, Claire, I'm so already intrigued with the topic that images will matter a lot. So because what are these corridors? What are these habitats? So maybe think about the images that you want to choose.
Yeah, I'm quite well connected with Mexican grey wolves, so I can get images of wolves, of captive wolves, and also of trail camera images of wolves as they're moving through. So there's quite a lot of really interesting imagery, especially when you look at how they map their journeys and collars that they wear and stuff. So yeah, I'm pretty excited I can find some good stuff for there.
Wow, amazing. That's such a brilliant idea.
So I'll go next, I guess. So I was thinking my research topic would be something we did at my school. Our Eco Ambassador program did a cafeteria food waste audit to see how much emissions we were producing from our cafeteria and how much we were contributing to climate change. Because we know we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic in our school, the rise in food waste, and then we researched deeper into how it affects the climate. And so I was thinking I could just go deeper into that, look at more how it can affect specific parts of the climate, and then like how we can solve it in smaller scales in schools and then a larger scale.
Nice. It's such a relevant topic, and it can be, the best part is you share, if you write this story map on this particular topic and on food waste and management, I think it can be replicated, or it can be a source of inspiration to other schools as well. So we really look forward to getting your examples, and I hope that there will be like some constructive tips and very nitty-gritty details as well, Callum, because sometimes this idea of food management sounds great, but how do you actually operationalize in the schools, and how do you actually do it is the tricky question. Everywhere you go, but no, this is too much work, and we will not be able to segregate food waste. And so I think that those questions are always there. So look forward to getting your ideas and tips so that we can follow your footsteps in other schools as well.
Thank you.
Here, Sir Brian, do you want to share yours and maybe even mention the SDG that you're tied to? SDGs, probably plural.
I'll do it if Brian wants to.
Sure, that's okay. So our project is about the Salem oak tree that's here at the Salem County, New Jersey. And recently the tree has fell, and luckily we received seedlings, so we're able to plant the tree at our school and RMS. The SDGs we're focusing on is 13.3, 13.2, 15.5, and maybe a bit of 11.4, 6, and 7.
That's great. And you already know all the sub SDGs also, which is great. I have to now refer back to the numbers with the points and get some updated information. So that's great. I think you are another thing that we learned from this particular your presentation or your idea is that all these SDGs are integrated. So it's great to focus on the integration, because otherwise we do only one, only two. It doesn't make sense, because all of them have so many different linkages. I think if you can just highlight the interlinkages aspect and how we need to think about the systems approach and think about it more holistically, will be such a valuable insight for everyone. Thank you for sharing your idea.
Pierce, did you want to kick in anything on that?
No, not really.
I'll just clarify something for Brian. So we're up in North Jersey and South Jersey. There was the big tree, and they're giving seedlings to every township in New Jersey. And so our township gave it to our school. And so it's telling the story of that. And then, of course, of the ecosystem services that trees provide. So we're deep in research phase on that right now. Brian and I just got off a call with our environmental commissioner right before this call. Megan, do you want to share what you're doing if you're still on the same track?
Okay, yeah. I'm working on racial profiling in New Jersey mainly, and my focus areas are the use of policies 10.2 and 10.3.
Megan, can you, suddenly you became muffled on your computer. Can you, I mean, on your mic, can you repeat, and then can you share that your SDG that you're focusing on too?
Okay, I'm doing racial profiling, mainly focusing in New Jersey. And my SDG focuses are 10.2, 10.3, also 16C, and a tiny bit 17H. Mm-hmm.
We have another project from a student who's I think on vacay today, not with us, but he was going to do, I think his family both in Russia and Ukraine, but he was going to focus on Chernobyl and how there's been this surprising regrowth of nature, and all sorts of animals coming back in. So I think he's still forming his story, but yeah. So I think there's some of the ones that are like in the works, hopefully right now.
These sound amazing ideas. We will all get to benefit from this a lot. Megan's idea on racial profiling is also fantastic, all about global citizenship education, and we need to be integrating that as well in all what we do. Freeman, is this how your class celebrates, or does spends time on summer vacation, or is this normal to do research on so many different topics?
They're pretty interesting and motivated kids, I would say. Although catching them during the summer is really wind through my fingers. So I'm just happy to see them when they pop in here just to see how they're doing, which is actually always awesome. Yeah.
And we get to benefit a lot from all of your ideas. And Freeman, thank you for being here. Great. So we'll continue our discussions going forward. Thank you for sharing all your ideas. We'll send an email with the link, and definitely send us your idea so that we can give you a license to work on your story map. If you have any questions, pop in next week to we'll discuss the questions and see if we can find solutions for it together. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend and stay cool, stay hydrated.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.